Hi, this is Miss Rogers. I wanted to take some time to reiterate some of the things that you should have learned already, and also to go through a couple of the steps for the stuff that you're supposed to be learning in 5.7 and 5.9, so that it may clear up some of the questions you have about when to use what formula and when to make sure it looks like what. So, a lot of the stuff that's in 5.6 and 5.7 you're going to have memorized. And I have a list of stuff here that needs to be memorized. So you need to make sure that you memorize the formula for slope. Slope-intercept form, point-slope form, and standard form. And we'll use all of these today in a couple of problems so that you can understand which ones need to be used when. Let's start with the formula for slope. It's a simple formula, however, if you don't understand what all that stuff is, then you won't know when to put in whatever number you need to put in. So let's say they wanted us to find the slope of the line between the points -2, -3, and 6, -4. Anytime they tell you 2 points like this, you're always going to have to use that formula. I don't care what they are asking for. If they're asking for an equation, you're going to have to use that formula because they gave you 2 points. If they're asking for the slope, you're going to have to use that formula because they gave you 2 points. So whenever they give you 2 points like they did here, you're going to have to use the formula. You need to understand that our first point is where we get our x1, y1 from. And our second point is where we get our x2, y2 from. The x's have to come first because it's always in alphabetical order. So I'm going to start by writing my formula first. I do that because the quickest way to memorize something is to write it every time you use it. So when I write the formula, I already know my y2 goes first. So I'm going to write down my -4. Then there's a minus in the formula. That means I need a minus over here. Then I write my y1. y1 is -3. Then I have my x2, that's 6, minus, because there's a minus in the formula, and x1 is -2. Now I can go through and do some simplifying. Anytime you have minus and negative side by side, that's the same thing as a plus. So I can make both of those pluses. -4 plus 3 is -1, and 6 plus 2 is 8, which makes my slope -1/8. Now they specifically asked for the slope. Because they only wanted the slope, I'm done. If they had asked for an equation, there would be more that I would need to do. Because I don't have an equation. Equations have x's and y's in it. This does not have an x or a y in it, and that's okay, because it is just the slope. Leave it as a fraction, because you always want to make sure you can convert it into rise over run if you need to for graphing purposes. So it's okay to leave them as fractions, unless you're in a special kind of equation. We'll get to one of those later too. So, you have problems in your homework that you can do in order to practice these. Please make sure that you do, because I don't have time to go through a bunch of different examples. We got other things for that. You can always rewind the tape and watch it again. That's fine. They're all going to work the same. Nothing else changes. Let's talk about a different kind of problem. They have problems where they ask you specifically to write things in slope-intercept form. So So I need you to understand a little bit about slope-intercept form, not just that it's y equals mx plus b. I need you to understand that the m stands for your slope. It always will. That's why there was an m in the formula for slope. And that b is your y-intercept, which is where it's going to cross that y-axis. So if we were graphing something that was in slope-intercept form, like y equals 2 over 3x plus 4, that means that we need to start graphing at 4 on our y-axis. Y is the one that goes up and down, so I put my first point at 4. Then, since this is in slope-intercept form, and we know that this one is our slope, we know that this is the same thing as our rise over run, which means we're going to go up 2 and over 3. It's always up, unless that's a negative number. If it's negative, then you'd be going down. But you're always going to go to the right when you go over. So I'm going to go up 2 from there, and then over 1, 2, 3. And that'll be my second point. And then I can draw the line. When you're doing this on MyMathLab, they'll specifically, unless it says do it using slope-intercept form, they'll expect you to use some specific numbers. Like if they ask you to find it using the intercepts, you have to actually put both intercepts on there. You can't just pick and decide to do it this way. But when you're taking the test, we're not going to know which way you decide to graph. So if you decide to graph them all this way, you can. However, comma, when you are taking the test and we ask you to find the intercepts, you have to be able to tell us the intercepts too. You'll get partial credit just for the graph, but you will not get full credit unless you tell us those intercepts. So this is the way to do it using slope-intercept form. It's the easiest way to graph, but please make sure you practice it. You always go to wherever this is, and then you go up and over. Let's say we have a different equation. Let's say we have y equals negative 1 over 2x minus 3. Well, now my y-intercept is at negative 3. So I would start by going down 3 and putting my dot. Then this says I go up negative 1. Well, if I'm going up a negative number, that's the same thing as going down. So I would be going down 1 and then to the right 2. And I'm not sure that you can even see that line on this screen, but it's there, I promise. And I explained how to get it. So I'm hoping that helps as far as how to graph stuff. Now let's talk about some equations. We know that slope-intercept form is one kind of equation that they will ask you to put lots of stuff in. But it is an ending point in your equation. It is not a starting point. So they might ask you to write the equation of the line. With a slope of negative 2 and going through the point negative 4, 3. They want me to write an equation, so I'm not going to use the formula for slope because they've already told me the slope. I have to end up with an answer that has some sort of x in it and some sort of y in it because I'm writing an equation. If that's the case, I need to make sure, generally speaking, they're going to want your answer to be in slope-intercept form. They may say they want it in a different form. If they do, they'll say they want it in standard form. However, whenever you put something in slope-intercept form, there's always a y, there's always an x. You're always going to have something for your slope, and you're always going to have something for your b. Now, we don't know what we're going to use yet for our b. We do know what our slope is. So you could go ahead and write it with the y that has to stay a y and the x that has to stay an x, but you won't know what that b is. So in order to figure out what that b is, there are two things you can do. If you learned in high school how to plug the point in and then solve for b, that's fine. Go ahead and do that. I understand that. However, because we're in this class, we'd like for you to use point slope form if you don't know that way. So if you don't remember how to get it from high school, go ahead and use the point slope form. It'll make more sense to you. Because it's point slope form, I chose to use that specific form because they gave me the slope and they gave me a point already. And the form itself tells me where to put stuff. Because we know that this is our first point, this must be our x1 and our y1. So when I go to plug stuff in, I start by writing my equation, my formula, so I can memorize it. And when I do this, I always want a y left in my answer, so I'm going to leave my y there. But my y1 is what I'm going to put in, and that's 3. There's a minus because there was a minus in the formula. My m, we said, was -2, so I put that where m is. Then my x has to stay in x because we need an x in our equation, minus because there's a minus in the formula, and then x1 is over here, so that was -4. So that gives me y minus 3 is equal to, go ahead and distribute that, so that's -2x, minus the negative we said was the same thing as a plus. -2 times a +4 is a -8. Then we said we wanted it to be in slope-intercept form, so I have to get my y by itself. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides. And the 3 is going to go where the 8 is because like terms and all. So y equals -2x minus 5. There are some more difficult problems like this that you need to be able to do. They are located inside of your My Math Lab. They'll work the exact same way. Nothing else is going to be different. You'll still plug stuff in just like we did here. The only thing that's going to change is what the numbers are. Sometimes they're going to give you a fraction for your slope. Sometimes they're going to give you fractions for this stuff over here to try to make things more difficult. If they give you a fraction and it's a pretty fraction like 1/2, you can go ahead and substitute 0.5 and use your calculator if you want. If they give you a fraction that isn't a pretty fraction like 1/3, I would not suggest using the calculator. Go ahead and stick with the 1/3. I know it's painful to do it with fractions, but go ahead and stick with 1/3. In fact, let's go ahead and do one like that so you can see how to do it with a fraction. All I'm going to do is change my slope to a +1/3. I'm going to leave the same point there. Because there's a fraction in it, there's a little bit more work to it, so I need for you to pay close attention to this. Feel free to pause at any point in time to write stuff down. So I start by writing my equation. Y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1. y1 is still 3. M, we said this time, is 1/3. X is still x, minus x1 is -4. 1/3 and -4 isn't going to make for a pretty fraction, but that's okay because I can deal with it. I do need to go ahead and still get rid of my parentheses. So 1/3 times x is 1/3x. And then 1/3 times -4, we said that would change into a plus, so it'll be positive. Top times top and bottom times bottom, so that gives me 4/3. Now there is nobody out there that likes fractions, I'm pretty sure. If you can deal with the fraction and you can go ahead and change it and get a common denominator and all that stuff, that's fine. If you don't like fractions and you want to get rid of it, that's what I do. I say I don't want a fraction at all. I want to get rid of my fractions so I don't have to worry about it. In order to do that, you have to multiply by the common denominator. My common denominator right now is 3. Multiply by common denominator. And that's a 3. So I'm multiplying everything by 3. 3 times y is 3y. 3 times negative 3 gives me negative 9. 3 times 1 over 3, my 3's will end up canceling out and just give me that 1x. And here my 3 is going to cancel out with the bottom 3 and give me 4. Or you could say top times top, so 3 times 4 is 12, divided by the bottom gives me 4. Either way, you're going to have 4. Punch it in your calculator. 3 times 4 divided by 3, and it'll give you a 4. Now I need to go ahead and move stuff. So I'm trying to get the y by itself because they still want it in slope-intercept form. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides. That gives me 3y equals x plus 13. Well, that is not in slope-intercept form because I don't have my y by itself yet. So there's more work I'm going to have to do to it. I need to get the y by itself, so I'm going to have to divide everything by 3. When I do, the 3's will cancel out over here, and I get y is equal to 1 over 3x plus 13 over 3. Remember we said we wanted our slope to be 1 over 3? Well, now it is. And now we can see that our y-intercept is 13 over 3. It doesn't have to be pretty. In fact, it's probably not going to be pretty because you had that fractional slope. But you do still need to know how to figure it out. This is not the hardest kind of problem they're going to give you. There are a couple of more difficult problems you're going to have. Please make sure you understand how to do this problem, though, because they have problems like this on the test. The next kind of problem you're going to be facing is probably one similar to that, only they're going to want your answer in standard form. So let's have you write an equation. Of a line with a slope of -2 and going through the point -4 in standard form, or ax plus by equals c. That's considered standard form. Now they said they wanted an equation and they went ahead and told us the slope, so we know we don't need to use the formula for slope. They can't start with slope-intercept form. Remember I told you that's where we end our problems, it's not where we start them. Same thing for standard form. That's where we end our problems, it's not where we start them. Even though they say standard form and it makes you think that, that cannot be where you start. You're always want to start with the point slope form if they give you a point and a slope. Here they did give you a point and a slope. So I start with y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. My y1 in this case is -4. My m we said was negative 2. x1 is 3. Then I do my distribution just like before. So I get y plus 4, because we had that minus a negative. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 and negative 3 gives me a positive 6. Now, normally we'd say, oh, we need to put it in slope-intercept form. Let me go ahead and move the 4 over, and I'll have it in slope-intercept form, and that'll be great. But that's not what they asked you for. They asked you for standard form. And in order for something to be in standard form, they have to have a couple of rules taken care of. Rule number 1, the x and the y have to be on the same side. My x and y are not on the same side. Rule number 2, the number in front of the x cannot be negative and it cannot be a fraction. So we have to make sure that it's not negative and that it's not a fraction. And rule number 3 is you need to make sure that the whole number is on the other side from the x and the y. So I need to get my x and y on the same side. So instead of moving the 4 over first, the first thing I'm going to do is move this 2x over. Now I don't combine it with anything up here because none of them are like terms. That gives me 2x plus y plus 4 is equal to 6. Now I have a positive x, so that's good. And I have a positive y. It doesn't really matter, but I do need to get rid of the 4. So I'll subtract 4 from both sides. And that'll give me 2x plus y is equal to 2. Now I know that we didn't end up with a negative x in this case, but I need to explain to you what to do if we did have a negative x. So let's say that we had ended up with something like negative 3x plus 5y equals 7. That's not in standard form because of that negative. So we need to go ahead and change it to put it in standard form. In order to do that, you can divide everything by negative 1, or you could multiply everything by negative 1, or you could just go through and change all your signs. Either way, you're going to end up with the exact same thing. So instead of it being a negative 3x, now it's a positive 3x. Instead of it being a plus 5, now it's a minus 5y. Instead of it being a positive 7, now it's a negative 7. Just go through and change your signs. And that's how you change it from being a negative. If you needed to make sure there wasn't a fraction there, you do exactly what we did on the one where we got rid of fractions. Multiply by the common denominator and it'll take all your fractions out. Okay? Believe it or not, this is not the hardest kind of problem you're going to have to do either. They come harder. Now that we've kind of seen how to do different problems and different forms, now I want to start throwing it all together. So they may ask you a question like, write the equation of the line through negative 3, 1 and 2, negative 6. Well, now I didn't tell you a slope, but that's okay because I gave you a rule. Anytime they ever tell you 2 points, you always use the formula for slope first. So that's the first thing we're going to do. I'll go ahead and make this my x1, y1, and this my x2, y2. So when I go in, I can say m is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, because we always write our formula so that we'll remember it when we need it. y2 in this case is negative 6 minus 1, because that's my y1. And then 2 minus negative 3. Remember, the minus is part of your formula, so the negatives have to be separate. Whenever you have minus and negative, that's the same thing as plus. Negative 6 minus 1 is negative 7. And then 2 plus 3 is 5. That's a nasty looking slope. But we have to deal with it. Now that I have the slope, I have a slope and I have 2 points that I can use. But we know we never start with slope-intercept form and we never start with standard form. We always start with point-slope. So now that I have a point and a slope, that's what I'm going to plug into my point-slope form. Now people ask me all the time, Ms. Rogers, how do you know which point to use? It really doesn't matter which point you use. You're going to get the same answer either way. But since I've already labeled an x1 and a y1, that's the point I'm going to use. I will say this, there are problems on the test where you have a 0 in one of your points. That always makes that point easier to use. So make sure you use the one with the 0 in it if that's an option. Okay, so for this problem, we said my y1 was 1. M we said was negative 7 over 5 times x minus x1 is negative 3. So that's y minus 1 is equal to negative 7 over 5x minus negative is the same thing as plus. Negative 7 over 5 times a positive is going to make it a negative number. 7 times 3 is 21, and then 5 times 1 is 5. We don't like fractions, so I'm going to get rid of my fractions by multiplying by the common denominator, which in this case is 5. So 5 times y gives me 5y, minus 5 times 1 is 5, equals, take out your calculator, 5 times the top number will give you negative 35, divided by the bottom number gives you negative 7x. 5 times the top number, which is negative 105, divided by the bottom number gives you negative 21. Always easier with your calculator, and you have one, so it's okay to use it. Not your cell phone, but your calculator. So I can go ahead and move my 5 to the other side. When I do, that's going to give me 5y equals negative 7x minus 16. Now that I have 5y equals negative 7x minus 16, I need to get the y by itself still, so I'll divide everything by 5 again. So y equals negative 7 over 5x minus 16 over 5. It's okay to have fractions in your answers. It's not okay to get bad answers because you left fractions in there. So if it helps for you to get rid of the fraction, go ahead and get rid of the fraction, and then you can put it back later at the end. That's what I always do. That way I don't make any mistakes in between. Now, a word of caution. In section 5.7, you are doing problems just like this. In section 5.9, they take it a step further and they start making application problems where you have to pull out information. They may say that somebody talks on a cell phone for 10 minutes and it costs them X number of dollars. And then they talk on a cell phone for so many more minutes and it costs them X number of dollars. And they want you to use those minutes and dollars to create your own points. So you'll have to be able to read and pull out that information. But before you start worrying about that, you need to get the basics of how to do this stuff down first. So once you have the basics, then we can start making sure you understand the applications. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I'm available via email. If you have questions about the exam you need to ask, please remember you are not allowed to use a cell phone for your calculator during your exam. It has to be a real calculator. Go out and get a real calculator. It doesn't have to be an expensive one, just a real one. No cell phones are allowed. I wish you the best. Have a lovely day, and maybe we'll see each other again.